Have you ever wondered why people join cults? Have you ever looked at a spiritual leader, either in your own lifetime or in history, doing outlandish or even immoral things, and wondered what is going on in their mind? Most importantly, if you're a seeker of truth or a spiritual practitioner, how can you avoid these unhealthy dynamics in your own spiritual journey? These are really important and interesting questions, and I just happened to read a book on this subject. It was very interesting. So, let me share a little bit about some answers to those questions that I learned, and also some practical guidance that will help to protect you from spiritual abuse so that you can continue on the path towards devotion to God or spiritual enlightenment, however you like to think about it, without getting caught up in any unhealthy dynamics. So let's first look at the follower. A lot of times we put the focus on the leader, but no one falls into an unhealthy relationship, whether that's with a partner or a spiritual leader, without having some vulnerabilities that make them susceptible to that kind of persuasion or misleadership. One of the main things that makes us susceptible to um, spiritual misleadership, we'll just say, is the desire to avoid responsibility. This world can be so complicated and confusing, and many of us come from backgrounds where we've been through some really painful experiences. Even our own parents might have betrayed us. People who were supposed to protect us were actually abusive or bad examples. And we start to feel like this world is a really unsafe place and we want to escape from it. And we want to be relieved from the anxiety and the burden and the confusion of having to make our own decisions navigating such a terrible place. And so, in that state, we can be really vulnerable actually to being misled by someone who's overly confident in their own um, knowing and their own independent ability to know things, which is what a misleader tends to do. And so, if we're looking to spiritual life as a way to avoid responsibility, or alternatively, if there's something in ourselves that we want to get away from, if we have some fault, some imperfection in our character or personality that makes us prone to certain patterns of behavior that cause a lot of pain in our lives, a lot of times we look to spirituality to erase that, to be able to rise above that. Of course, there's a healthy aversion to both of these desires, but if we're overly eager, we might sign a deal before really looking over the terms. In other words, we might be so eager to escape the confusion of the material world and overcome our own misgivings that we falsely attribute the ability to someone who's not actually able to deliver those results because they're a self made, dishonest spiritual leader who's simply taking advantage of us for their own aggrandizement. So we always want to be careful what kind of situation we're practically getting ourselves into and be really aware that these fears make us vulnerable to manipulation. So now let's go to the more interesting question. You look at someone like James Jones. You know, he ran the People's Church in California. Then they moved to Guyana, and tragically, hundreds of people committed suicide under his instructions in that cult. Now you got to wonder, for someone like that, the leader of a group like that who would lead people to such a dark and unnecessary demise, what on earth is going through his head? What is he thinking? You know? You look at dishonest spiritual leaders, and not all spiritual leaders are dishonest. There's genuine ones. But when we look at dishonest leaders and they're simply abusing, misleading people for their own aggrandizement, or even they're physically or sexually abusing them, or making them do things that are detrimental, the ultimate being killing yourself. Do they honestly believe in what they're saying, or are they lying? And if they're lying and they know it, how do they not feel terrible about this, right? It's kind of incomprehensible for a normal person to relate with that or to empathize with that. And when I say empathize, I don't mean that we're validating it. Empathy doesn't require validation, it just requires understanding. And a lot of times we're quick to call someone evil, and there's validity to that. But sometimes we get deeper insights and understanding by empathizing with evil to understand, well, what is going on there? Like, what is your math? How did you reach that conclusion? What's your logic? What are you thinking, right? I think this is a valuable question because it helps us to understand human nature. Because we're all human beings, and it's my firm belief that whatever any human being has done before, we're all capable of under certain circumstances and influences, right? It all depends on the context. We behave completely different in different contexts, private life, public life, with family, with strangers, in a foreign country, in a familiar country. Our behavior can change so drastically depending on the circumstances. And there are just certain circumstances and influences, internal and external, that can bring out any human behavior, really. That doesn't mean that there aren't people who have certain mental illnesses or deformations in their brain that can make them act in ways that are un- unlike a normal person. That's also there. But anyway, we want to understand the psychology. So let's get straight to the question. In this book, he explores several people who had become gurus and misled others and abused them. And what he found was that they all went through some sort of psychotic breakdown where their whole sense of self, their whole worldview completely collapsed into utter chaos. They went through an intense pain and confusion and uncertainty that was practically unbearable. Now, the mind is a self regulating machine. And what that means is that the mind doesn't automatically tell us what's true. The mind automatically tells us what will help us to survive. That might be surviving physically, or that might be surviving psychologically. And so when your whole sense of self and your worldview collapses, you might not be in danger of dying physically, but you are very much in danger and, in fact, experiencing a kind of psychological death. What's deeper than the fear of death for us who identify with our minds and our bodies? It's such a deep and visceral and overwhelming fear that the mind panics and comes up with some way, some truth, quote unquote, some explanation that will redeem us psychologically and save our psychological life. And so, what happens when someone is having that kind of intense psychological breakdown is their mind will actually come up with far fetched, grandiose explanations about what's happening. And the person is prone to think things like, I'm not having a psychotic breakdown. I'm being spoken to by God. The voice in my head is God. I am the chosen one. And this just is the beginning of their logic. From this starting point, they reinterpret their whole experience, their whole life, and even their future in the lens of that false revelation, a quote unquote revelation, right? And then they recover. They recover, and suddenly they have a really strong sense of purpose and meaning and confidence and a lot of self belief. They still have a little bit of lingering doubt, but that's why they seek followers. They feel like for their revolution to really, their realization to really be true, it must also be universal, not just true for that person, but true for everybody. And so to resolve their own doubts, they double down and then they seek followers and they try to convince others of that truth. So this is the answer to the question. The person acts with incredible confidence and charisma and certainty and groundedness like you don't see in normal people. We're all a bit insecure because we're always scanning what other people are doing and thinking to make sure that we will fit in and we will excel within whatever group we identify with. But the false guru or the psychotic guru doesn't feel that way. They have an incredible conviction. They have a different perspective and they are on a mission to share it. And so when insecure people meet that person, they're really impressed by their charisma and their confidence and the certainty of their worldview. And they experience a false type of relief in surrendering to that person. In all religious conversion, there's a relief of surrendering yourself to a higher authority who relieves you from having to figure it all out by yourself. And there's a healthy version of that. There's a genuine spiritual version of that. But when you apply that same instinct towards someone who is crazy, that is a very unhealthy version of that. But the same emotional relief is there. And then what kicks in is called the sunken cost fallacy, which is basically for the follower, once they've invested themselves and their time and their money and their sacrifices and efforts and all these things into believing in that person, the mind has to justify it. Similar to the person having the mental breakdown who then has to tell themselves, I didn't have a mental breakdown, I have an enlightenment. The false follower has to say, well, I wasn't misled. I am experiencing a spiritual awakening that other people just don't understand. And so when their friends and family say, this is crazy what you're doing, this doesn't make any sense, this is totally unhealthy, they don't listen because they have to believe their whole identity and their ego of their own intelligence all depends on justifying that decision. And so people will progressively ignore greater and greater levels of ridiculousness and hypocrisy just to justify their own decision and commitment, especially after years go on of the same thing. And especially if they're surrounded by other people who are sharing the same delusion and who are all showing on the outside their fanatical faith and proclamation that this is all the most wonderful thing. We're the true enlightened ones. No one else gets it because they're all an illusion or they're all evil. and they're all, in a cult will isolate you, so you're only associating with people like that. That reinforces it even more. And then for the guru, the false guru, they have both conviction but then hidden doubts. But then the more that all of the followers are loudly professing that, oh, yes, you are God and you are the voice of God and all of these grandiose beliefs, then that person believes it. And they start to fully embrace that illusion, that delusion. The next part is where it gets dark, and that's where you can have these kinds of extreme outcomes, like what happened with the Jonestown cult, where everyone committed mass suicide. What happens is that all of the impurities within the heart of the false guru start to grow and manifest and infect everyone who's following them. And so, if they have desires for sex and status and worship and power, they start to do things that are wrong and harmful, both to themselves and other people. But because everyone has bought into the delusion, they have to continue to tell themselves that these things are spiritual. And that's where things get really dark. So that answers our first two questions. Why do people join cults? And what the heck are cult leaders thinking? Now let's get to the third question. How can you, as a sincere seeker of truth, as a sincere spiritual practitioner, avoid this? And let me make it really simple for you. If you have any doubts about this, I want you to look at your life in terms of just what people do. For a moment, put your beliefs aside and just look at the practical application of those beliefs, right? Let's take the Jonestown example. In their minds, they're telling themselves, I don't know exactly what they were telling themselves, but let's just say they were telling themselves that our leader is talking with the angels or with aliens on another planet who have revealed the fate of the universe, and we will be the only ones who are saved, but the only way we can do it is by committing suicide at this time. That's what they're telling themselves. But put that aside, what are they practically doing? They're committing suicide. So, for a moment, just look at the behavior of yourself and others, yourself and the people you're surrounded with, outside of the belief system, and evaluate it independently. And if you find that this behavior is very overtly unhealthy or exploitative, either for you individually or for everyone, it's really important to listen to your own inner voice. Don't feel the need that you have to convince everyone else to see what you see before you can act on what you know. You need to begin to have confidence in yourself. It might be that everyone else says 2 plus 2 equals 5. And every day, everyone repeats to themselves over and over 2 plus 2 equals 5 because our teacher says that 2 plus 2 equals 5. And truth faith means to say that 2 plus 2 equals 5. And you've invested so much into that truth, and you realize that if you, God forbid, say 2 plus 2 does not equal 5, you will suddenly have a huge drop in how you're perceived by the people that you are connected with, and your life will you'll have to face a lot of uncertainty and a lot of things that you've been avoiding for a long time. It becomes extremely painful for you to think about saying that 2 plus 2 is not equal 5. That is the pressure and the psychological force that keeps you trapped in having to believe and somehow do mental gymnastics to tell yourself this lie. The way out of it is not to convince everyone else. The way out of it is to start to trust your own perception. If you know that 2 plus 2 is 4, you need to start acting on that knowledge, even if it means that other people criticize and condemn and reject you, because that's just a sign that they're not in a healthy place. And so maybe you need to have compassion for them from a distance, but focus on yourself first. Take care of yourself first, just like when you're in an airplane, you got to put on your own mask first before you help anyone else. And then we need to not give up spirituality, but seek a healthy version of it and not use it as merely an escape from things we don't want to deal with, which are actually realities we need to deal with. Because God didn't make any mistake in putting you in the circumstances that you're in. And spirituality is not a way to escape the reality that God has put us in. It's a way for us to grow strength to work through it, because it's by going through those difficulties that we grow as people. And as we grow in people and we deepen our faith in God, that's where we really become spiritual heroes, like Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. That's our true path. For some people, it means living a very renounced, simple life. And for other people, it means living a quote unquote normal life, but having a spiritual meaning and purpose to it. And both are valid paths, and it's a little different for everyone what's right for you. It takes time to find your path, but for sure, take responsibility for your life. Be willing to face some of your own struggles, to work through them gradually, and then seek God from that platform. And you won't be vulnerable to manipulation or cult leaders, unhealthy dynamics. And instead, you can have a happy life and a vibrant, successful spiritual path. So I really hope that this is helpful for you. If you have any questions, feel free to either leave a comment below, or if you feel like you have something more private that you'd like to share or ask about, you can message me directly. All right, everyone. Take care and best wishes.